Okay, I'm going to walk you through doing building a configurator. So this is an ESP32. This is I'll give you a link for the one that I'm using. You don't have to use this one by all means. There's smaller ones that you can make even a more compact design, and there's other ones that you can use that are bigger in the design. So the main pins that we care about, we're going to be using for the configurator, are pins 16 and 17, as you see there. So that's 16 and 17. Those are the ones we're going to be using for our communication, our serial communication between the ESP32 and the ESP8266. Now the E8266 that I'm using is a Wemos D1 Mini Pro. They're very inexpensive. You can get them online or China or whatever. Amazon, China seems to be the better and cheaper route. They're nice and small. Now what's great about these is they're compact, they're dinky, and they don't come with any pins on them. Now what's fantastic about this, if I turn the ESP32 upside down and I take the ESP8266 on top of it, and if I line the pins up just right, I can end up having the pins that I need for the 16 and 17 lining up on pins 5 and 6. Okay, so I'll show you how this kind of looks right here. So I've got 16 and 17 right there, and pins 5 and 6 are D5 and D6 right there. And all I have to do is bend all the rest of the pins down or cut them short. I'm just bending them in case I ever do want to do anything else with the extra pins. But I can just bend them down and put the D5 and D6 right over the top of 16 and 17, just like that. And if I bend the rest of the pins down, I can easily push this and have it recess slightly and lay right over the top of the pins with only the D5 and 6 pins coming through. And the rest of the pins I bend down or repurpose or solder to an electrical component. And now, we obviously need to power this chip. Now the 5-volt input and the 3-volt input do not line up with the voltage outputs on the ESP32. So you see the 5-volt down here on the bottom left, and you see the 3-volt up here on the bottom right. Well, that doesn't really correspond with what we want to do for our power components on the ESP8266. So we have to just wire that directly or solder that directly with a couple wires and run it through. It's very simple. You can even just use a bare wire or a wire with insulation and go from the pin of the 5-volt pin on the ESP32 and run it up to the top of the 5-volt on this, or run it through it, however you prefer to do it. It's up to you. And then obviously the ground pin is right next to the 5-volt, and that needs to come all the way from either this pin right here, right there, is that ground, or the ground that's located right in the middle of the pins right here. Now they're not conveniently located, they're not opposite sides, but that's okay. You can run a wire for the ground pin underneath it before you even put the ESP8266 on top, and then come up right where you need to on the ground pin here as well. So there's ways to make it work and make it kind of cool the way you want to, and so you can line it up, and you can be creative with how you want to do it. Now this is a completed ESP8266 configurator with the ESP32 attached to it. You see the 2 pins that I have right there. The only pins that are coming through are located on pins D6 and D5. Now what I did, I was around the ground pin from this end over here, and I just glued it down and soldered it to the ground pin location on the ESP8266, and the same thing for the 5-volt. I came from over here on this side, and then I soldered it down right there. And I just used the quick pins right here, and I put it at an angle that's just perfect so I could fit a USB cable in here to program and update if I need to on either of these boards. So that's my build. And I use just the regular wires that come with the little kits to be able to attach to the pins on the ESP32 for power. And then I spliced it into a JST connector, a 1.2 millimeter, I believe is the size for the JST thing, and that can plug directly into a power cable. Now, I really am a big fan of solid wires. These are not solid wire. The reason why I like solid wires is because it's stiff and unbendable. So you can I like using a phone line or a Cat 5 cable for all of my electrical components that I've been messing with. Just makes more sense and makes things more easier. And I hate soldering wires together. It's such a pain in the butt. Sure, I have the tools to do it, but it's just, I don't like the time that it takes to solder them. So I use these little telephone wire splices. And they're the right size, because almost everything we use for these little electrical components are 22 to 24 gauge wire. Don't use 26, it's too small, and you don't want to overamp or overcurrent your wiring and make it burn up. So I always use 24 as the smallest wire that I use. A 22 is fine as well, but you don't need to go any bigger than that, because a 22 and a 24 can carry 3 to 5 amps. So I wouldn't worry about it in terms of your power supply. So I have those connected on one side, and this is a terminal location that I can clip in the 1.2 millimeter JST connector and power it. And on the other end, I have a male JST 1.22 connector here that'll go onto the board of the BRX. And I'll show you how that's exactly. Okay, here we have a BRX we're about to mod. Now, it's important whenever you pick a screwdriver that you pick the right type of screwdriver, because otherwise you're not going to be able to get all the little tiny pieces, or all the little holes into the holes with your screwdriver. So I'm using a Phillips number 1. So a Phillips number 1 bit is like the smaller size of a Phillips. It's not a tiny one, but it's a pretty small one that'll be able to get all the screws as well as the little tiny black screw that's located on the trigger. And this is a very narrow body to fit in all the holes without any issues and not getting stuck, because the depth on these holes is pretty deep. And don't forget that you're also going to need to get an Allen wrench to be able to remove and replace the scope. It's important to first remove this portion right here. This is the shoulder strap, and remove this guy. If you have installed a phone accessory holder and the headset and the scope, remove all of those components, because it'll be more cumbersome later when you're trying to all the accessory components on the BRX. The next step is to remove this. Now, I don't actually remove the entire rubber shield on this. These 2 screws come out, and I set them aside with the rest of the parts that I took off of the unit. I take those 2 screws, and those are the only 2 screws I actually set aside, except for one more internal screw inside if I'm going to take the entire shell off. But we're not going to take the whole shell off, because this mod is very quick and easy. So the next thing to pay attention to is whenever you do separate the gun, this is going to fall out or stay there and get lost somewhere. Take that out as soon as you unscrew all the screws, and you'll open up the gun and set it aside with the rest of your components. And don't forget to put it back, okay? So don't forget that part. It has a little plug on it, and it can easily get lost, and then you may forget to put it back on, and it'll be too late. Now that I've removed the 2 screws that are holding the handle cover in place, the rubber for the grip, I can easily just tuck it over here and step it out of the way, and it won't be an issue during the rest of the work I'm doing. So I don't have to take both the screws off and deal with putting it back together. And then when you do remove the battery cover, I always also leave the screw in the battery cover and just set it aside. Now, if you notice the battery, whenever you pull the battery out, you see that the cord is usually tucked inside the gun. You need to kind of wiggle it a little bit to disconnect the battery terminal. Once you disconnect the battery terminal, I take the battery and I set it aside. And we'll remove the battery later. I'm not going to bother with it just yet. But next thing I do is I actually tuck the battery clip back inside the gun. Now I actually have to open it in order to get it out, but I'm going to open it anyway. And I do this because it's harder to do this and pull it out whenever I'm trying to handle the gun at the same time, and I don't like it to catch sometimes. So I always push it back inside. I have loosened all the screws for the BRX, and I'm ready to begin this disassembly. First of all, if you notice, I did start playing with the top of it already, and this guy fell right out, exactly as I was saying. So I'm going to put him, set him aside, and don't forget to put him back. Okay, so all the screws are loose except for the reload handle. I'm not going to remove this. There's no need to remove it. Now, whenever I do pry this apart, it takes airplane near the Air Force Base or Marine Base. So this handle mechanism is on this side of the gun. The trigger is on this side of the gun, and this LED fixture is on this side of the gun. So there's wires that come to this side. In order to pull this entire panel side off, I have to pull those 3 plug ports out of the main board. Okay, so it's important to note where those go. I'm going to go ahead and loosely pry this. And it does usually take 2 hands to do this. I recommend doing 2 hands. I've got 1 screw slightly attached to one of these. Let's try this again. There she goes. Okay, now I leave all the screws in place inside the gun because I'm lazy and I don't like to take them out. I just leave them and set it aside. Now, what's really neat about this this trick is I don't really have to disconnect everything. I can do the mod easily without having to pull it all the way apart. But in order to show you how to do it, I'm going to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the main board and pull off the wiring that I'm using for the trigger. You see the trigger right there. I'm going to pull off the wire that goes to the LED. And I'm going to pull the wire out that goes to the reload, which is this guy right there. It's a 3 connector with 2 wires going in it. So I'm going to remove those. And taking those 3 wires, I'm able to set the gun cover aside. Now I could take the power cable all the way out, but I'm not going to bother with that. I could take the screw out right here and set it aside, but I'm not going to do that because there's enough room in here to do what I need to without doing that. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to get our handy dandy wire that we made up. Okay, for our configurator cable. Now there's a lot more wires in here that I know. And I'm going to slide him underneath the main circuit board. Have him come out to the other side by the speaker. I'm going to take the wire that I need for him. And he's going to plug into the port right here that's labeled 5 volts. I don't know if you can see it exactly very well, but this guy right here, there's a 5V on the bottom left. That is our port that we're going to power the configurator from. So we place our JST connector right into the slot. We have our cable over here running up, ready to go into the battery. Now I'm going to take this plug portion, I'm going to feed it through the battery pole box with the battery cable that we pulled out of just a moment ago. Here's our cable that's going to power our configurator now coming through the opening for the battery. The next step is to loosely and carefully set the BRX cover back on top. Now there's a couple things you want to watch out for whenever you're doing this, all right? First of all, we got to make sure we're plugging all our cables back in first. I'm going to do that now, and I'm going to show you some tips and tricks about making sure that that IR receiver doesn't get jammed. Okay. So first things first, once you get all the cables plugged in, and do not forget those 3 cables to plug them back in because your gun won't function properly without it, and you're going to open your BRX again and have to redo it again, or plug those in. And then also it makes it difficult to make sure all the cables are clear and there's no cables coming out the edges. Now, Battle Company does a great job of making sure that they have good wire harnesses and support inside these guns. And so you don't usually find any wires that are just straggling and trying to come out of the sides and seams. So that's good. The second thing you got to pay attention to is the trigger. Now you notice how this gun doesn't sit flush? Because most of the time whenever you open up the BRX, the trigger gets misplaced, and by moving it back into the trigger position, it is able to slide back into the right spot. Okay, and then almost everything else fits really well. Now be careful, very cognizant of whenever you're taking this IR piece apart, the IR receiver at this location, because if you don't have it set properly, you may have to adjust and finagle with this a little bit. But I've done this a few times to where I'm pretty comfortable and I really don't have a problem with the way I remove it. Just lift it straight off whenever you take it apart and the board doesn't get moved and dislodged. But that can always be like a little difficulty. But this all went back together really, very smoothly. I'm going to go ahead and put the screws. At this point, I've done the barrel screws, the lower screws, and the handle, and these screws over here. I have not done this screw or these 3 screws on the top or this screw by the IR receiver. The reason being is because our little friend that we talked about, we got to make sure he sits properly into the location where he goes. So we got to make sure he gets in his little groove in his hole. Okay, and then we're going to put some little pressure on there to make sure he closes up. And then we'll put those screws in now at this point. With all of our screws back in place and the gun is put back together and it's very firm, I'm going to do a double check and make sure all my connections are good. And you can do this by all means before you close the case. I'm just pretty confident in me being able to turn it on properly. We're going to go ahead and do a power check and just connect the battery. And it looks like the BRX turned on properly. We're going to check some buttons and make sure all the buttons are working. We're going to use the directional pad.
Deathmatch, Generals, Lives.
All the buttons are working properly. Check the Alt Fire
Select
button.
a game.
Alt Fire button works. The trigger.
Alpha Team.
And the reload handle.
Weapons hot.
All buttons seem to be functioning. Compartment fix. So we're going to go ahead and remove the battery out of the encasing. We're going to go ahead and pull it. You can wiggle it out. Jimmy rigged this guy where you can slide out. Very, very awkward fit to get the battery terminal through here. There it goes. So he's out. Now we're going to go ahead and plug the battery in. Sorry. Okay, once he's in, we're going to push the terminal connector back into the little hole, into the groove, and get as much room as possible for our configurator to fit inside this encasement. So I'm going to turn the battery upside down to get the wires on the bottom side. Okay, and then I'm going to take our configurator, located, where did I put our configurator? There he is. Take the configurator, and he's going to go into the battery casing as well, right here in this spot, whichever makes sense. The wires don't get pinched. Okay, and plug him into the JST connector. Just like so. Okay, now we got the JST connector. He's all plugged in. Should be good to go. Okay, now we've got to do some updates and make sure we got this guy set up properly to be configured to the gun. Inside this encasement, and to make sure objects in this isn't flopping around and hitting it, I like to use some foam inserts, some sponges or whatever, just to kind of fill the gaps and spaces before I put the battery cover on top of it. You can put the wires underneath the foam so it's all nice and secure and get it all packed in there nice and tight. Equipment differently. I actually put a sticky printed whatever those called, label maker notes onto the gun. I put the headset number on it. I put the last 4 digits of the MAC address number on it, and I put the name that I use for the player to constantly log in for call sign. I don't want to change this name. I want to keep it consistent. So this NW Player 6 is the actual player name that I'm going to use for this particular VRX. So whatever you want to use for your VRX, make sure you have that, write it down, because whenever we configure the settings for the software, for the configurator, we got to make sure we're using the right identification. Okay, so now that we know that we have the identification for the gun we want to use, we're going to just make sure our gun has the right name associated with it in case somebody's used it. So I'm going to go ahead and log in as we saw on the identification, NW Player 6. I'm going to log in, enter our PIN. Okay, we're going to turn our BRX on.
Select a game.
And I'm going to pair to that BRX. So we're going to scan. I'm going to see what this gun pops up with, because sometimes I do testing and configuration with the guns, and I may or not have logged into with a different account. And whenever we log in with a different account, it ends up associating the name of the gun with something else. See, that's with my user login JE Burden right now. So I'm going to click on that gun, pair it. Okay, now the gun is connected. So I'm just going to dun. Let's do a little test game. Sure. Next. Let's make sure our volume set up. Create. Okay, cool. And I'm going to start a game just to make it run. And make sure that it gets the setting right so that I know that my gun is receiving the gun.
2, 1, get some.
It's loud. I want to make sure he got the gun name loaded. Okay, so close, and we're going to go ahead and log out of this. Back.
3, 2, 1, game over.
And go back, and log out. Okay, I'm going to turn the BRX off. I'm going to restart it, turn it back on.
Select a
I'm
game.
going to log in as player number 6 again. Oops. NW Player 6. Log in. And make sure your pairing configuration is set to off on the automatic settings, because we're trying to mess with the guns and double check stuff. So we're going to go scan and see if we change the identification for the rifle. And if you see there, the second one down, it says NW Player 6. So the BRX that I'm messing with has been renamed to player number 6, exactly how we want to. And close that application, and that's all. Make sure he's got the right firmware and all the settings are correct and applicable to the BRX he's going to be designated for. All right, so we're going to do these one at a time. We obviously have two input ports to be able to connect to. We're going to update one at a time and make sure that we do not have it powered or plugged into the BRX. We don't want to send power to the BRX backwards. It's just not what we want to do. We want to use, you don't want to mess up anything on the BRX, so make sure you're doing your updates separate whenever the BRX is not turned on. You want to overburden the USB on your port or something, or anything like that, so just unplug it, take it out of the gun for doing your updating. So first we're going to do the ESP8266 plugged in, and obviously the power on the ESP32. It's because they are wired together through the power pins. So they're both going to be running, but we don't really worry about it or need it. All right, now I've got two programmers open currently. We're going to open the BRX configurator. You want to open up the most updated file and check your settings. All right. Now, if you ever look and scroll through the section, there's a lot of notes I have in here. Please read through the notes. But really what's most important is the section that says update this section. Okay, so this is the most important imperative portion that you make sure you have the right information. So first of all, character authentication. This is what you need that's compatible with your Blink setup. So depending on what your Blink token is, that code needs to match. All right, so make sure that that is set properly. The next thing you want to verify is that your Wi-Fi information is set up properly. So whatever your Wi-Fi network is and whatever the password is, have those configured properly. So that's really it that you need to make sure that you got to set up in this update section. Now, if you are wiring it the way I am wiring it now, or if you're wiring it the old school way, whenever I first started doing this, you got to make sure you pay attention to the pins for the settings. So in the instructions section, I updated the instructions to indicate what pins go to what. Pin D1, SLC input of the LCD. Pin D2, if you are using LCD, you got to use those. D1 and D2 of the ESP8266. I'm not using it. I don't really care to use it. You can if you want, whatever. Connect the 5 volt or 3 volt to the VCC of the LCD. Connect the ground pin to the ground, blah, 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 okay? Now, here's the most important stuff. Pin D7 to pin 17 of the ESP32. That was the original plan, right? And D8 to pin 16 of the ESP32. Or in my build, D16 goes to D6, pin 16 goes to D6 and 17 to D5. So 17 is the ESP32, 16 is the ESP32, and those are the pins that we're using from our configurator that lines up perfectly for the D1 Mini. So that's what we need to make sure we're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll. I'm going to actually go ahead and search for that. Control F. And see what comes up. Go back. All right, here it is. Okay, so under the definitions for defining pins, I have these guys slashed out. Okay, so this is my setup right here where I have D17 is equal to 13. Okay, 13 on an ESP8266 is, guess what? D5, right? Or sorry, yeah, D7. I'm trying to remember this. D7 equals 13 to pin 17 on ESP32. Yeah, so D7 is equal to the number 13 in Arduino language. Okay, so what we see on the board is D7. You can actually type in D7 if you want, but I just like using the actual number, the GPIO number. And that works better. And for D5, use 14. Okay? I'm using 14. I slashed out 13. Okay? Because that's the old school method that maybe a couple of you might have already set up. But D14 is my settings. So if you want to correct that and you don't want to wire it the way I did, then all you have to do is go like that. And then it is enabled to do it that way, using pins D7 and using pin D8. Okay? But I'm using D4 and D5. So therefore, I'm using 12 and 14, okay? So that's the difference there. So be careful of it. Yeah, I hope you guys don't mess that up, but that's how it works. So that's it. So I'm going to make sure my tool's set up to be connected to the COM 3. Yep, good. And since he's connected to the ESP8266, we're going to go ahead and upload the sketch. And let him do that. And while he's uploading the sketch, I'm going to go ahead and open up my settings for my ESP32. All right, now there's a couple things we need to change to the ESP32, right? This section right here says the BLE service name is NW player number 8. Well, we just changed that gun that we're configuring right now to NW player 6. All right, now there doesn't seem to be anything else we need to change because all this stuff is standard. If you had a particular gun that was different, you may want to change this, but this is pretty standard for all of the BRXs that are Gen 2. Okay, so you shouldn't have any issues with these. You don't need to change them unless there's something weird going on, maybe Gen 3 or something. You may have to change this for Gen 3. But Gen 2, all fine. Okay, so this is really the only portion you need to change. And that's all I'm going to do except for the gun ID. So this gun is actually going to be gun number 0. Gun 1 is different. I set that one up already. And so that's gun 0. Okay, so he's ready to go. I'm going to go over here and check on my status for my uploading. And it looks like I'm done compiling and I uploaded already, leaving hard resetting. We can check and see how our guy is doing. Okay, it looks like he's connected, right? I can reset the ESP8266 to make sure he's working properly. And he connected to Blink. So he's on the server, he's on the Wi-Fi. So he's working properly. This is all set up, good to go. So we're gonna go ahead and unplug this guy, 66, and we have plugged in the ESP32. We're gonna close out the comms port so it doesn't get all confusing. And we're gonna open up our IDO for the BRX ESP32. Now all the settings are already set up. We just gotta connect our ESP32 to make sure he's on the right comms, which looks like he's already connected. And we're gonna go ahead and hit upload. Now this is tricky. The ESP32 that I use, I have to actually hold the button when uploading the code. This is 100. It's a formatting code or something, so it makes it in serial mode so it receives it. So whenever it pops up and it says that it's connecting and it's having a hard time connecting, sometimes it does it automatically. Sometimes I gotta press and hold that button for a couple seconds. So we'll see what it does. Come on, compile. When you haven't compiled the code since the last restart, it takes a few minutes. Or like 30, 40 seconds. Should be good. Any moment now. The green bar's all the way full. There it goes. Uploading. Okay, he's connecting. If he keeps giving me dots, then I'm going to press that button. Pressing the button. And there he goes. Press and hold it. Uploading. Give it a moment. It's pretty fast. And done, completed uploading. All right, so he is connected. Let's go test it on our BRX. Turned our BRX on, and we're checking the comms port. Whenever the comms port starts up for the ESP32, we're just looking at the ESP32 configuration right now. It starts up as a starting Arduino BLE client application. It's really actually not doing anything. That's just a dumb code I left in there. Don't worry about it. So he's doing his thing. Now that he's powered up, he has not paired with the gun yet because we have not enabled him to pair. Even though the gun's on, he's in normal operating function and mode. So we're going to go ahead and turn that on via the configurator. Okay, we're going to go ahead and open up our Blink app and double check that the LCD and Blink device is a green light, which means he's online. So the ESP8266 is connected to the Wi-Fi network. Now all the configuration settings for the gun are right here, but we're not going to use any of that until we take control of the tagger, activating the BLE device. So in the bottom middle it says tagger control. I'm going to press that button, and on the screen it just activated the BLE settings for to be able to scan and find the BRX. So it should be looking to be able to pair to BRX.
Select a game.
And he's not finding the right one. So we've got an issue because he's not pairing. So we're going to go ahead and cancel this, turn it off, and try and see what the issue is. Okay, so I went into the Configurator ESP32 code, and what it was I did not use capital letters for NW Player 6 for the name of the BRX. So it is case sensitive. It is case sensitive for your name that you put in for the Bluetooth identification for the BLE ID name. So make sure you do that. That was my mistake. So I'm going to go ahead and press activate now. And turn the gun on.
Select a game.
And momentarily he should pair.
Connection established.
There he goes. So if you heard it, he's all paired and connected now. So we know that the BRX will connect. And let's just do a quick check. Make sure it can start a game.
Get some.
All right, it started the game. Go ahead and turn the devices off, and we will insert the components inside the BRX. Got the inserted ESP32 and 66 together, 8266, and some foam inserts. Be able to pack this guy in there. I'm going to go ahead and close the door. So now we have a fully assembled, put back together BRX with the configurator built into the battery compartment. I've got the app up and running. It does not show any device paired, so it's got no scoring device and no blink device connected. We're going to go ahead and turn the BRX on.
Select a game.
Now, if the Wi-Fi is in range or the access point for connection for the configurator is available, then it will connect. Now you see it is now connected. All right. It says connected since 9:40 a.m. June 5th. That's right now. Or 9:49, whatever. But anyway, so it's connected, paired. So now he is enabled to be controlled. Now the ESP8266 will eventually go to sleep, and so is the 32 uses a little bit more power than the 8266. He's asleep now as is. The ESP8266 wakes him up in by pressing the activation button right here. So I'm going to go ahead and press activate.
Connection established.
And the ESP8266 or configurator just took over the gun. Now he doesn't do anything. He can't reload, he can't press buttons, he can't change options. Okay, I can go ahead and change the volume. Crank it up.
Volume.
So we can hear the options. I can change the weapon. We're going to change the weapon to be a assault rifle for weapon 1.
One more weapon ready for duty.
And we're going to change slot number 2 to be a player's choice.
Select a weapon.
And we can go ahead and cycle through the weapons. Up.
Select a weapon.
I got a bug. Whatever.
One more weapon ready for duty.
Alright, so I gotta work out that bug. I don't know. I must change something. We're changing the team. I'm gonna put him as a free-for-all.
Free-for-all.
Okay, and we'll go ahead and start the game.
Get some.
There it goes. So the game started. Ready to go. Pretty cool. So all set. We got a fully modded BRX for testing.